Hey fearsome friends, and welcome. Tonight the stalkers are out. In the park, at your place of work, at school, and even in your homes. Keep your eyes peeled, folks, lest you end up with your own creepy admirer. So sit back, relax, get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. So a little backstory. I'm a boy in 8th grade and had started a new school, and just a few hours ago I got one of the scariest phone calls I've ever received. I was sitting on my bed chatting with some of my friends on the phone when I got an unknown caller come up. I thought it was just one of my friends probably pranking me, so I answered but muted it because you never can be too sure. I waited a bit until I heard a familiar voice on the other end. They said my name, and I then realized it was someone from my old school. I didn't reply, but I kept listening. And then, "Hello? Is it you, James?" I didn't say anything at this point, and it became kind of creepy. The person on the other end started talking again and said in a witch-like voice, "I know where you live." He then said my address with a, "I'm coming for you." I got really confused and again wondered who it was. I had been muted for the entire duration of the call, waiting for the person on the other end to hang up, and they finally did. But only after saying again for the last time, "I'm coming for you." I tried to remember their voice, though they might have changed after 2 years, but those words haunted me whether it was a prank or not. The creepiest thing, though, was that I hadn't given my number to many of my old school friends. I tried to figure out who did have my number, and I could quickly think of a few, but couldn't come to any further conclusions. 3 months later they called me 3 times in total, and the last time he rang, my mum took the phone and said, "Leave my son alone or I will call the police." They hung up and I thankfully haven't gotten a call since. This happened back in early 2005 when I was 15 and a sophomore in high school. While I had a lot of friends at school, my closest ones had very strict parents. I wasn't able to hang out with them outside of school until senior year, so I would get bored on the weekends and take frequent walks around my neighborhood, sometimes stopping at a 7-Eleven or Starbucks to buy a snack or a coffee. On this particular Sunday, I had taken a shower before I left. My hair was still wet, and I remember walking outside and thinking, "It looks like it's going to rain. Maybe I shouldn't take a walk today." But against my better judgment, I went. On my way, I encountered a stray dog, which was odd to me since I rarely saw stray or lost dogs in my neighborhood. She was obviously heavily pregnant too, as her nipples were swollen, but they didn't show signs of prior suckling. I tried approaching her, but she was very protective and growled at me. We were on a busy street, so I debated calling animal control to pick her up, but she just kept on walking. There was no way I would be able to hold her in one place, with how aggressive she was, so I felt sad and said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you," and walked in the opposite direction. Now I had 2 different usual routes on my walks. I opted for the second one after feeling defeated about the stray dog. I walked a little over half a mile up the nearest street, after I turned around and got to the next busy-ish street. During this time it finally started to rain, and to my surprise, I saw the stray dog again. As soon as she noticed me walking down her same path, she ran across the street, nearly getting hit by an oncoming car, but she made it across and started to bark at me. I debated calling animal control again, Maybe I could distract her long enough for them to get to her, but no luck. She ended up walking into the townhouse complex she was in front of. I still feel guilty about what I could have done for her, and I started my walk back home. Then a moment later, a white SUV at the stoplight got closer to the curb. I ignored it, but then heard someone call out, "Excuse me?" I instinctively turned around, where from a distance I thought the guy driving the SUV was my friend's dad. He had the same model and the driver looked like him. However, as I got closer to this guy's vehicle, my stomach sank. It wasn't him, and I had no idea who this man was. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. I felt uncomfortable but tried to be friendly. "No thanks, I live a few blocks away," and I gestured my head to the south. He was persistent. "It's no trouble, I'm going that way. Let me take you home." In that moment I remembered my hair was still wet from my shower earlier. I must have looked kind of pathetic. My clothes weren't soaked, though. "No, really, it's fine, sir," I said. "Really, it's no trouble. Come on, it's raining." At this point I was fed up with the honking cars behind him as the light had changed to green and shouted, "No! Piss off, you creepy scumbag!" and booked it down the road as fast as I could for a couple of blocks until my lungs couldn't take it anymore. I looked back to see which direction he'd gone. He'd driven straight on and wasn't going in my direction. I only told a few of my friends the next day at school what had happened, and most of them said that I'd dodged a bullet. But a few said maybe he was just trying to be a good Samaritan. I tried telling my school about it, but since it had happened on a weekend, they said they couldn't do anything. I had figured I'd never know what it was all about, until earlier tonight when I looked up crimes in my hometown. I googled my hometown's name and human trafficking, and found an article about a man in his late 50s soliciting a 16-year-old girl online and paying her for sex. The incident happened in 2013, and he was arrested and charged in 2015. He admitted to having other victims, but none of them ever came forward. None of the articles had pictures of him in them, though, so I googled his name. It was the same guy. I still remember his face, and the creepy way he smiled when I kept saying no. So this happened 2 years ago when I was still in high school. A little bit of background. My mum and I lived in an apartment in the city that I went to high school in, and as we didn't live too far from the school, I went and returned home by foot every day. The incident happened during winter season, so when I got out of school at 5 p.m, it was already dark outside. I remember perfectly when it happened. It was a Friday evening, and for once I didn't have classes on Saturday, so I took the time I had to go shopping with a friend. We finished around 6 p.m. and went our separate ways to go back to our houses. It was maybe 6:30 when I arrived in the street where I lived, and I had two options: entering the building by the front door, or entering by the back door, which was closer to where I was. I chose the second option and entered the alleyway where the gate was and started to look for my keys. But as I opened my bag, I saw a shadow on the wall next to me, indicating that someone was behind me. The thing is, though, only residents of the building would go in this alley, since there was nothing except the building's parking lot, closed by the gate. So clearly the person had absolutely no reason to be there. I turned around to face a man, probably in his mid-30s. I couldn't really see since it was dark, and there was only a street lamp a few meters behind him. I tend to panic really quickly, so I tried my best to stay calm. He said something to me, but as I had my earphones in, I asked him to repeat what he'd said, thinking he was asking for directions or help. He simply replied that all was going as planned, and that he just wanted to know my name. I didn't want to give it to him, so I gave a fake one, in hopes that he would leave me alone after that. But he asked me if we could talk for a bit, and if I could give him my Snapchat ID, because he wanted to get to know me better. I was really scared, but decided to stay polite, as he could have been armed or something, and I didn't want to upset him. I told him I didn't have a Snapchat, which was true, and he stopped to smile and said, "Why are you lying? Every pretty girl your age has Snapchat. Otherwise, how would you share your cute photos?" I didn't know how to react to this, so I simply said it was the truth, and that I needed to get home to take care of my little brother. At one point he must have noticed how scared I was, as he'd asked me, "Am I scaring you? Why are you scared? I just want to talk with you." And he actually started to yell in the street, saying that all girls were the same and that he hated women. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't speak. I was literally terrified, so I started to slowly walk towards the gate. But he screamed and told me not to move or he'll rip my throat off. Then he calmed down and asked if I had a boyfriend. It was like speaking to two different people. I didn't want to reply, so he got mad again and walked towards me, like he wanted to hit me. I wanted to run to the gate, as it was only 10 meters away, but I knew he would follow me, and I needed to enter a code anyway, so he clearly could have hit me, or worse. Thankfully, right then, a car arrived in the alleyway, and I didn't know the woman inside it, but honestly she was my only escape. So I screamed for help. She opened her window, told me to get in the car, and told the guy to move or she'll call the police. She waited with me until the creepy dude had finally left, and made sure I got home safely. I can never thank her enough for saving me that day. The guy was sincerely creepy as hell, and to this day I still think about what could have happened if the woman had arrived a few seconds later. So this park has different parking lots and various pull-offs from the main road. So I pulled into one and followed the road down to the last lot there. This is a park preservation area with great walking trails and a bunch of fishing spots. There's some open fields too, but it's mainly just heavily wooded areas with plenty of trails. So myself, my partner, and my two large dogs had finished one trail that came out into a parking lot at another pull-off. We looked at the map and realized we had to take this main pathway that linked all the pull-offs, so we walk it back to the one we were at, and it came through near the entrance. This meant we had to walk about 3/4 of a mile-ish beside the blacktop to where we'd parked. As we were walking though, this old guy, 70 plus, was in a minivan and had slowed down and pulled his mask down to his chin. I looked at him and went back to talking to my partner, who was also confused about what was going on. He looked like he was going to say something, but just kept staring for about a solid minute, then finally driving off. As we were walking back to the truck and talking about the old dude in the minivan, we passed the first two parking lots when we thought, "Hang on, where did that guy go?" We walked a bit further than I thought. How the hell is it possible that he's parked beside my truck? It's not the only vehicle at the park, or even in that parking lot, and there's loads of other great spots. I just couldn't believe he was right beside our truck. My partner asked what was so wrong with it, so I briefly explained to him that this guy was exactly the type to do something bad. He was doing everything wrong. He was beside my truck and was what looked like pumping his tires. The thing he was using was seemingly plugged inside his van, but his tires weren't low enough to have to pull over to fill up. And even if they were, why would you pull to the last parking lot down the pull-off? It was all just really sketchy. Anyway, we were walking to the truck, and he was still staring. Hard, like he was going to say something, but never did. Us staring back at him didn't stop him either. We got the dogs in the truck, my boyfriend got in, and I asked him to take a picture of the guy's license plate whilst I got the dogs some water. But as I was getting in, this creep had already hurriedly put everything away, closed all 3 doors he had open, and hauled ass out of the parking lot. Good riddance, I thought. Then we pulled out to the spot, about 30 seconds after him. Driving along, I wasn't going very fast, and right when I saw the exit to the main road, I saw the guy and his van was still there waiting to turn out. This guy gunned it onto the main road, and he must have been sitting there for at least a minute until he saw me. I ended up going the other way to avoid even worrying about him again. But thinking about it, literally nothing sat right with me. Why was he staring like he couldn't look away? Why did he say nothing when it constantly looked like he was about to say something? Why did he end up parking by my truck? Why was he airing something up? Why did he leave so quickly after a picture of his van was taken? People like this are the reason why I don't like leaving the house. I thought about calling the cops to tell them, but I'm not even sure what would have come of it. One night when I was 15, I was walking to meet up with 2 of my fellow trailer court friends. We had issues in my neighborhood with what felt like never-ending child abduction attempts, some of which were successful. It was dark. I had earphones in. I was 5'4" and a very fit small native girl in a high-risk area. But I only had to walk for 5 to 10 minutes to meet my friends who were waiting for me, so I never thought I'd need to be cautious. I had been walking for a couple of minutes when I spotted my friends. I started waving, but they didn't wave back, even though they were both staring at me. I took my earphones out and shouted their names, when they immediately started signaling for me to shut up and get to them. I laughed it off and kept my same nonchalant pace. That's when they both ran up to me as fast as they could, and before I could even say anything, one continued to run past me, and the other pulled me into his arms and whispered, "That man is following you." I turned around and saw my friend chasing a fully grown man and was yelling, "Why are you following her?" Me and my friend started running after them, and I was begging for my friend to just come back, but he wouldn't. He chased him for 10 minutes before the man ran into the forest a couple of blocks away. When the man was officially out of sight, I broke down. Those 2 boys made sure I never had to walk alone at night again. It's because of them that I didn't have another scary encounter until I left the province and was on my own. So this story happened a couple of months ago when I was on my way home. Typically every day of the week, my mum or dad pick me up from school, but sometimes my parents would go on a business trip or vacation, so I would have nobody to pick me up, and I would have to take the bus. I was 17. It didn't bother me that much though, as I liked to play music and think during the ride anyway. Now usually when class ended, I would walk with my friends to a place where all the buses gathered. Then you can choose which one you take to get home. Now I don't know why, but that day I chose to do something different. To maybe try a different trajectory from a different bus stop that would take me less time to get home. Now to get to this bus stop, you'd have to go through a narrow street, at the end of which would bring you to the parking lot, an old block of flats and a bunch of little shops. This area is commercial, so usually very busy during the day, with a lot of traffic. I had my headphones in, so I wasn't really paying attention to anything. But as I was walking along the pavement, a foreign blue car came straight towards me. It took me a second to realize what was going on, and I took a step back and quickly changed direction. I didn't really think much of what had just happened though. I thought it was just a weird guy who'd drunk a little too much or something, or apéro, as we say in France. So it didn't surprise me too much. However, after about 2 minutes, I started to get a weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I was creeped out but carried on my walk regardless, because I was almost at the bus stop. Suddenly then, I saw a blue car which was cruising along right by my side, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw that it was the same blue car that had practically hit me a few minutes ago. Then the window of the car rolled down to reveal the face of the blue car creep. I was scared but really confused. He said hello, but I didn't answer and just kept walking, as if I hadn't heard him. Finally I arrived at the bus stop, and thankfully the creepy guy was gone. It felt weird and I didn't feel comfortable, as I still felt someone was looking at me. Now I would have loved the story to have ended there, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I then saw the blue car park right in front of me. I immediately knew I had to get away, somewhere where he could never harm me. And as I was thinking this, I noticed a small bakery with lots of elderly and mums with their children, so I thought it would be the perfect place to go and hide. I went in and pretended to wait in line. I scanned my field of vision to see if he was still there, but I didn't see him, though I still had that bad feeling. I kept looking around when I saw a big black truck right next to the bus stop and thought, he must be hiding behind it waiting for me, and my instinct didn't betray me. I could see the top of his head protruding from the truck, and at this point I couldn't really escape. If I chose to run, he would pursue me with his car, and I couldn't stay in the bakery forever, so I had to think of a plan. I knew that I had a bus at 12:07 p.m, and it was now 12:05. I would wait in the bakery until I saw the bus arrive. Then I would run to the bus so he wouldn't have the time to get me. That's what I did, and fortunately I succeeded. However, I saw him get into his car, and that's when I saw his face and body entirely. He was really skinny, had a lot of teeth missing. I know that because he kept smiling at me. And he hadn't much hair either, and looked very filthy. Whatever he wanted to do with me didn't reassure me at all, so I put my hoodie up and looked out of the bus window to see if he was still there, but I didn't see him. Once again, I would love the story to end there, but no. Now I live near a hospital, and in order to get to my house, you have to go up a hill where there are some traffic lights. The bus I was in had already passed the traffic lights and was at the top of the climb, when I saw his car and his gaze at the traffic lights, looking for me. I really had to move my ass in finding a good plan for when I got off this bus. As soon as I got off, I ran. I saw his car at the intersection of the bus stop and hid behind a four-wheeler that was parked in front of me. I hid there whilst waiting to see where he was going to go, and he couldn't see me, thankfully. He must have thought that I was still in the bus, because he continued to follow it. I could see Blue Car Creep pulling away in the distance, so I ran home, and when I crossed my gate I stood at my front door for about 10 minutes, in shock of what had just happened. I asked myself, what if he had seen me behind the four-wheeler? What would have happened to me? His strategy was actually to follow the bus and watch everyone who got off, in the hopes that I was one of those people, so he could block me with his car and get me. This episode really scared the crap out of me, and now each time I walk by this bus stop, I get chills and always have the fear that the guy was going to reappear. I think I'm also just traumatized by blue cars now. Every time I see one, I just can't help but get stressed out. So this happened when I was just 18 years old, fresh out of school and living on my own for the first time. Looking back at it though, in hindsight, I should have gone to the police. Now I worked at a children's clothing store called Justice. I was working a typical shift of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. when a pretty atypical customer strolled in. Right off the bat he gave off major creep vibes. He was a dirty, smelly, and an upper middle-aged balding guy who didn't even have a child in tow. Definitely not something I was used to seeing in that particular store. He didn't seem genuinely interested in the merchandise either, only feigning interest in a few of the displays any time I would look over at him. I could feel his eyes on me as soon as I would go back to what I was doing. The manager, also picking up on his sketchy vibes, scared him off with her aggressive hospitality. I found it really weird that he'd refused to make eye contact with her while she asked him if he needed any help finding anything. He just shook his head no and left in a hurry. I then noticed him walk past the storefront once or twice after he'd left. But since this Justice was located in a strip mall, it wasn't that weird, so I didn't give it another second thought. I made a mental note of it though, since at that point all the staff had been talking about the greasy old sketch ball. My manager, who had been eagle-eyeing him the whole time, pulled me aside and confirmed to me in private that my suspicions had been correct. He had been staring at me any time I wasn't looking at him. All this had happened considerably early in my shift, so by the end of the day, after dealing with multiple Karens, a daily occurrence working at Justice, the sketch ball was far from my mind. I clocked out, headed out into the parking lot, got into my car and started the 7-mile drive home. However, about halfway, I looked into my rearview mirror to see a white truck with a plough on the front of it. The only thing that struck me as odd though at first was it was midsummer, and this person had a plough on the front of their Toyota, and the windows were tinted so much I could barely make out an outline of the driver. I then suddenly got a sinking feeling, as I remembered sketchy greasy guy. I decided to see if I was just being paranoid, or if this person was trying to follow me. I'm sure I'm not the only paranoid person who has tried to make a bunch of nonsensical turns to shake a theoretical tale. Only, unlike all the other times I've played Shake the Tail, this person actually managed to stay on me. After about the 5th turn down a random avenue, my gut twisted into knots as I watched the Toyota slowly creep around every corner I took. I had circled the block twice, and still the white truck with the plough and tinted windows was behind me, but far enough away that I still felt like I was being crazy. I decided to try one last test to determine for sure if this was a trick of my imagination or actually something to be worried about. I wound my way out of the avenues, deciding to pull off to the side of the road into a little dirt turnaround beside a local bar, hoping and praying with all my might that the truck would just go by, and still clinging to the slimming chance that this was all in my head. I let out an audible gasp, though, as the white truck slowly pulled up right behind me. I saw the driver's side door open, and I floored it out of there before I saw anything else. My heart racing at this point, I floored it back up a different set of avenues, and finally stopping at a stop sign when I felt sure I was in the clear. But to my horror, I heard the haunting roar of an engine with its pedal to the metal, and seconds later I saw the white truck with the plough coming so fast up the avenue that it launched slightly into the air as it passed me at the intersection, flying down the perpendicular no-outlet road. I took my chance and turned left onto the road the truck had just come from, figuring they were going to have to turn around in someone's driveway before continuing the pursuit. I drove white-knuckled the whole drive back to my town, constantly checking my rear view for the white truck that I thankfully never saw again. I even circled my own block for an hour after that, fearing that person was out there somewhere, watching me, waiting to see which house I pulled into. Once it was all over, I naively brushed it off without so much as a police statement. But the more time went by, the more the whole situation seemed like a bad joke. I never found out who was in the truck, and that person might not have been connected to Greasy Sketchball Guy at all. At the time, I didn't take the incident very seriously. When I got home, I told my boyfriend of the time, and he shrugged it off, so I did too. However, it wasn't the first creepy thing to happen to me, or the last. It's disturbing to think that it's not uncommon for young girls or boys to find themselves in similar situations. This happened about 2 years ago, and it might not be that bad, but I still get nightmares about it. I was in 8th grade at the time, and I was going to this big public school near my house. It was my first day, and the teacher had assigned me to sit next to a boy called Dan, and he was nice enough. So I took my seat, and he was chatting away to me, asking about my name and age, etc. After a few days of sitting next to him, I started to feel this bad vibe from him, but I never really gave it that much thought. Then after 2 months of sitting next to him, he would try all sorts of things in an attempt to get closer to me. I was really uncomfortable with this, but I didn't confront him about it, as I was naive and not good with confrontation. John, my guy friend, was assigned to sit next to us, so now I was sitting in the middle of Dan and John. John and Dan grew close, and I had no problems with that. Then one day John was going to eat lunch with us, when he brought Dan with him. I was surprised that Dan was now tagging along with us, which he'd never done before, but I'd never really thought much of it. So Dan took a seat next to me, not next to John, but to me, which made me feel a little confused. But I was a naive 14-year-old girl, so I just brushed it off. That's when things got a little creepy. He started moving closer to me, like he was trying to get our bodies to touch. But as a Catholic girl, I was told to keep my distance from boys. I moved away a little bit from him, but he didn't stop, and was just moving closer. That's when my friend told me she needed me to go to the bathroom with her, and I frantically accepted. She'd noticed how creepy he was being towards me. I still didn't do anything about it, though. I thought maybe he just had a crush on me. But I kept my distance, and that's when the creepy went up a level. One day I was sick and couldn't go to school, so I stayed home and just watched some TV. Checking through my Facebook, though, is when I saw it. Dan had sent me a friend request, which I'd never accepted, and there were also some message requests from him. I was curious, so I opened them up, and there were hundreds. He was asking why I wasn't at school and what had happened to me. He was also getting mad and was cursing at me, said I was a bitch for ignoring his messages. All of these hundreds of messages were sent that same day, and I felt sick to my stomach. I had never experienced this before, and I didn't tell my parents because I was scared they wouldn't allow me to go out with my friends anymore. That night I was still pretty shaken up from it, when I received yet another new message from him, and this one still haunts me to this day. It read, "Hey, I heard you were sick. Sorry for getting mad at you. I just thought you were avoiding me. So feel better and drink your medicine. I know you haven't eaten dinner yet, so please eat so you can feel better. Then I can see you again at school." It sent chills all over my body, because apart from my parents, no one knew I was sick, not even my teacher, And the fact that he knew I hadn't eaten dinner yet too was really weird, because it was 11 p.m, and people usually eat at 8. I suddenly felt like I was being watched. So I closed my curtains, and I still didn't tell my parents. I just wanted to believe it was just a coincidence. Feeling better, I was on my way to school. I didn't want to sit next to him anymore, but that wasn't an option, because my teacher was pretty strict when it came to the seating arrangement in class. So as I was walking to school, I noticed he was walking behind me, and a sick feeling came to my stomach again. I quickened my pace, and he did the same. I was so scared, but eventually I reached the school entrance and ran the rest of the way. I saw my friend and told her everything, and she advised me to stay away from him as much as I could. But that didn't stop him. Valentine's Day rolled around, and our school made a big deal about it, so they cancelled all classes and told us to come to school wearing red clothes. I just wore black jeans, a plain red shirt, and a black cardigan. Nothing really fancy. But then I got a message from him. He was asking if he could take a picture of me and print it so he could watch it while he falls asleep, and added a winky face. I didn't know what that meant, so I just ignored him again. But I saw him staring at me whilst touching himself. I was so creeped out. I reported him to our teacher, but they didn't do anything. After that, my friends made sure to help me in keeping him away. During that day, a guy gave me chocolates and a flower because they liked me, and Dan threw angry glares at me. I ignored him again, and when I was on my way to our classroom to get my bag, I saw Dan sitting there, and his face was blank. We were alone in the classroom right then. Our classmates were busy at the gymnasium, so I was really scared. I put on a brave face and walked over to my bag, when he saw me and screamed, "You're a slut like your mother. Why won't you like me back? God wants us to be together." I was so scared I was frozen to the spot. He was looking at me, and I was feeling like I was going to die. He stormed off, and I was so relieved. I left after that, went to my friends and cried. This was the last straw. I finally told my parents, and they reported him, but the school just said they were going to talk to him, which they never did because he didn't show up at class the next day. We heard he'd quit school and was working at a small convenience store nearby, but that wasn't the end of it. He made a fake account with his name, but his profile picture was me. He sent me another message, which was a screenshot of his phone wallpaper, and that was me too. But the photo wasn't one I recognized. I never took that picture. It was shot from my window whilst I was sitting on my bed studying and had my earphones in. I was wearing a large shirt with no bra and just a pair of shorts. He captioned it with, "I hope to lay next to your bed." I was so freaked out I cried. I told my mum about it, but she told me just to block it, because we were going to be moving away in a few weeks anyway. So that's what I did. A year later, I was now in the 9th grade, but we weren't able to move as planned, because there was a problem with the new house. And that's when he created another fake account with my friend John's name and picture, and I accepted it, because John had been talking about creating a new Facebook profile, so I just assumed that was it. Then I received a message from the account, and it read, "I just want to explain. I dropped out of school because of you. I told my parents that we'd broken up, and that I couldn't stand seeing you. I'm also sorry for shouting at you that day, but I want us to be together to have lovely sex and children. If you can't like me back, it's fine. Just don't block me again, because I think I will actually kill myself if you do. Okay? Love you." I was confused at first, because I thought it was John, but it quickly sank in that it was Dan. I immediately ran to the bathroom to vomit. I was so scared I didn't know what my next move should be. If I blocked him, would he actually kill himself? Instead of blocking him, I asked my parents to reach out to his parents, so they did. They were so embarrassed and apologized profusely, and it was all done through text, of course. I then heard through the grapevine that he is now at a mental facility, getting the help he needs. And me? Well, we eventually did move, and I cut all my connections with Dan. I started a new life, and am now very careful with who I make friends with. It all started with a normal day at work. I worked at a small grocery store at the time, and my duties consisted of gathering shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries, normal minimum wage stuff. It was rainy that morning, and of course I was assigned to carts all day. About 2 hours into my shift, I saw a man rushing to get his groceries into the car, and it was pouring. I ran over to him and started helping him with his bags. "It's pouring," I said. "Mind if I help you get out of the rain?" "Yes, thank you so much," he said. As he was closing his trunk, he looked at me with a very surprised look on his face. He lowered his eyebrows, looked me up and down, and smirked. "Are you a new hire?" "No, I've been here for a couple of months." "Oh, you're very pretty," he said in a weirdly sensual tone. "Thank you. Have a good day." I shut it down. I was not interested. As I was walking back to the store to hide until he left, I could feel him watching me while I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued to work, not really thinking about it. After my lunch, I was at the register bagging groceries, and I noticed that same man from earlier walk in. I pretended I didn't see him and just kept bagging. He came up to the register and got a single chocolate bar. I didn't give him a bag, and he stood towering over me and said, "Aren't you going to bag my item?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you wanted a bag for one thing." I put his chocolate bar in a bag and told him to have a good day. "When are you off work, sweetheart?" "Oh, I'm not comfortable giving that information out," I replied. He returned with, "That's okay, you've been here for what, 5 hours? You probably get off around 6 or 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Disgusted, I went to my manager and told her what happened. She told me not to work the lot anymore and to ask someone to walk me to my car. So by the end of my shift, I had a male co-worker walk me to my truck, and we scanned the parking lot, looking for this man's car. We didn't see him, so my co-worker went back inside and I started my truck. I called my mum to tell her about what happened, and once she answered, I left the parking lot. Literally the second I turned onto the road, I saw his car pull onto the road behind me. I told my mum I thought he was going to follow me, and she just told me to drive around a bit to try and lose him. So I drove around for about 20 minutes, just going in circles around my town. I hit a red light and he pulled up next to me and started yelling something to me out of his open window. I, of course, pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear what he was saying. "You would bear some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave for me, little lady." He then started being very explicit about what he was going to do to me if he caught me. I told my mum I was going to call 911, and if I wasn't home in an hour, then call the police. While I was trying to dial 911, the man sped ahead of my truck and started brake-checking me. Frantic, I waited for the closest intersection and turned up the block. My phone fell under my seat while I was turning, so I decided to go to the nearest open establishment and run in and hide and have someone else call 911. The closest open business I could find was a convenience store at a gas station. So I pulled in, parked up, and ran for my life into the store. I told the clerk what was happening, and she took me to the break room and locked me in there, While processing that I might have survived this ordeal, I heard the doors of the storefront start violently rattling, and before I knew it, the clerk was locking herself into the break room too. She was on the phone with the police, and they were on their way. We were silent, cowering in a dark room. I found myself feeling guilty for wrapping another woman into our worst fears. My thoughts were racing through what I had said to him. Did I lead him on? No, I just told him to have a good day. Has he been following me for longer than tonight? How did he know what car I drove? Are the police going to get here in time? Are we going to die? Finally, the small room was illuminated with red and blue lights from the crack under the door. We heard a voice over the intercom telling us it was safe to come out. Shaking, the clerk took out her keys and opened the door, and we walked out and gave our statements. After the police left, I turned to my unexpected saviour and profusely thanked her. We cried, hugged, and she walked me to my car. The next night I went back and brought her some food and an Amazon gift card. I have been in a near-fatal car accident, 10 feet away from a mountain lion in the wild, and I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I can tell you, reader, with total honesty, I thought that was the end of my line. Thank you for reading. Stay aware, be cautious, stay safe. This all happened last summer and has put me on high alert ever since. Just the thought of it brings up the fear all over again. I was working at a restaurant, bussing tables and ringing people up at the register. It was a summer job, and the only one I could do with the job market being how it is. I was extremely grateful to finally have some income. During the dinner rush, a large extended family came in. There were at least 10 people, and they all ended up having a lot of dishes. It was a buffet-style restaurant. Whilst taking away their plates, I tried to make conversation, as that was one of the main things management wanted me to do. A middle-aged man in the group kept talking to me, and he seemed nice enough and very polite. I was moving throughout the restaurant, as it was super busy, and I was the only one bussing tables. When about 20 minutes after talking to this man, he appeared behind me, asking me what I was doing. He completely surprised me, and I told him I was picking up plates from tables. He proceeded to ask me to come hang out with him, so I explained that I was working and couldn't. He then asked me when I was getting off work, telling me he would wait for me outside, and kept repeating the phrase, "I'll take care of you," and just wouldn't leave me alone. I was 21 at the time, and was creeped out to say the least. I walked away and made myself busy, trying to simply ignore him, but he followed me throughout the restaurant, repeating that he was going to take care of me. I was now on the verge of tears, trying to get away from him, going up to tables and asking people how their meals were, hoping that if someone saw what he was doing, he would stop. But he wouldn't leave me alone. Finally, after about 5 minutes of this, I made a beeline for the back kitchen, feeling absolutely terrified. I told a co-worker what was happening. After he'd come across me in the dish room trying to keep it together, he asked me what he looked like, as he was going to see if he was still there. I then told my manager about it, who was absolutely fuming, so went to talk to the guy. I hid in the back for a while per my manager's instructions, and after a while we went back out front, and she had me working the cash register instead. She made sure either her or one of my co-workers was with me at all times until the guy left. As he finally walked out the restaurant with his whole family, he stopped at the front, looked me in the eyes and told me he would be waiting for me in the back when I got off work. I just scared myself writing that. I was really freaked out for the rest of my shift, and was dreading when I would have to leave. I had my manager walk me to my car, as I was on the closing shift, and luckily he wasn't out there. I also had co-workers walk out with me for a few weeks after that, and luckily he never came back. But it scared me enough to get pepper spray. I have had self-defense classes already, and felt prepared to defend myself, but all confidence went out the window after that. While I never saw this man again in real life, he did find me on Facebook somehow, and tried to message me and send a friend request. He was promptly blocked, and luckily I never had a run-in with him again. It was enough, though, to make me wary everywhere I went from then on. So this happened about a month ago. I work half-night shifts in a UK chain, where I generally finish around 2 a.m. It was a still Friday night in a coastal town, and these are somewhat rare to come by at this time of year. There wasn't a single gust of wind, and not a cloud in the sky, when I finished my last cigarette before the peaceful moonlit cycle home. Or so I thought. Now I should note that I have had many issues biking home at night before, so I had known from previous experience to just stick to the main roads, where the streetlights remain illuminated, guiding me home through a troubled town. So that is what I did. Kept to the main road and followed it up to a steep incline that passes by a large park known and loved to the town. Now when I say park, I mean a fenced-off big field with a children's play area and little car park. The park is completely dark as usual, with the only exception being a pair of car headlights that are clearly parked at the child's play area. They must have been at least 200 meters away from me biking on the lit road that runs past it, so it was a really big park. This road is quite steep, and I'm putting the deltoids and the glutes and the flutes to good work, pushing up this big thing, when I started hearing a shouting towards me, coming from the car. It was far away, so it sounded like unintelligible hooting and grunting. One clearly was a bloke, and another clearly a woman by the pitch of their voices. I thought nothing of it, as they are clearly not cries for help, more likely just a couple of crazy kids up to no good and making mischief. I ignored them and carried on pushing up the road. I got a bit concerned when I heard the slamming of their car doors and the roar of their engine as they speedily teared through the field to make its way up to me, the unsuspecting cyclist. I pushed it harder, just past 3/4 of the way up this road. I was almost at the top, when I heard them exit the park and start making their way up the road, hollering, shouting, and revving the engine. It was like something out of Planet of the Apes. As I got to the top, they were nearly right behind me, and I quickly turned onto a pedestrian path. They razzed past, no indication of slowing down, no indication at all for that matter, as they pulled onto a large roundabout at the top of the road. They were shouting all sorts of nonsense, but the one thing I did make out was, where the hell did he go? After I had turned down the alley and turned my bike lights off. They ended up looping around trying to find me for a few minutes before zooming off, and I promptly made my way home. A couple of days later, I heard that a fire engine had been called to that park about an hour after the incident, as the children's play area was ablaze, and they caused thousands of pounds worth of damage. Makes me wonder if they were chasing me down, thinking I'd witnessed their vandalism. Would they have tried to hit me off my bike, as they were clearly demented enough to burn down a kid's play area? I reported what I saw to the police, and heard nothing back. I stuck to the darker roads then, just in case I ever bumped into those rascals again. When I was 16, I was having English classes. that were of all ages, so I was used to having colleagues older than me that also wanted to improve their language skills. I was an average nice girl, and always felt like I had to be polite and friendly to everyone, even if I got a bad vibe from them. But I was only really close to another girl my age back then, Jasmine. She was much more popular than me, so she would always introduce me to new people. One day I noticed this new guy in her group. He was 32, very talkative, and was always smiling. For some reason though, he made me feel uncomfortable from the get-go. I think it's because he would stare at me for no apparent reason, while everyone was talking as a group. He just seemed to address me specifically every time, but ultimately though, I didn't give it too much thought. As days passed, he began to wait around my classroom door and start up conversation with me. My friendship with Jasmine, high school, my family, etc. I thought it was weird that he was so interested, given that he was much older. My brother was around his age and he never showed any interest in the lives of my friends, but I felt guilty for feeling bad, like he was just being nice and I was being mean to think he was weird. But I should have listened to my instinct. Instead, I forced myself to answer and make small talk. He told me how close he was with Jasmine, and that made me feel a bit safer. However, when I asked her about him, she said she didn't know him that well, but that he seemed nice enough. One day I got a call from a strange number, and it was him. He said he'd gotten my number from Jasmine, which really upset me. So I confronted her about giving my number out, and she said he'd insisted, and she gave in. He started calling me all the time, 2 to 3 times a day, to ask about my day, say that he missed me and wanted to chat. He started telling me private things about his life, because he felt like he could talk to me, as I was so mature for my age. I stopped answering after a while, or would make excuses and quickly hang up. Then he would send me messages, and that's when things started getting worse. The messages would vary in tone. Sometimes they were really childish, with lots of emojis, and would wish me a lovely day or say he was thinking of me. And other times they would simply say, "You're so pretty, too pretty," with no context. He would say he was glad I didn't have a boyfriend, and that I should never get one, or he would get mad. I never answered those messages, and showed them to Jasmine. I told her I didn't want to see or talk to him any more before or after class, and she said she would help. I started going to class late, so I wouldn't meet him in the corridors, and leave class immediately after it had finished. But I'd see him watching me, and I could feel he knew what I was doing, and that he actually sort of enjoyed it. I felt like it was a game to him, making me feel uncomfortable. He stopped talking to Jasmine and everyone else, but continued to message me to say he missed me, or ask why I was so busy. I blocked his number and thought that would be the end of it, and was even able to relax a bit. But one day, as I was talking to another girl outside the school, he showed up, with a big smile, and said that it's been too long. Why wasn't I answering his messages? He acted like he was worried about me, that I was studying too much, etc. He invited me to have coffee with him in his house. I told him no and went inside, where I pretended to study in the library until he left. He was waiting around doing nothing for more than an hour. Now I was getting really scared. Since the day he'd invited me to his house, he became more aggressive, making fun of me whenever we bumped into each other in the corridor, saying stuff like, "Still busy," or "I'm in no hurry." He then managed to find my social media and started sending me messages there, each time more and more explicit. He would comment on my pictures, saying I was sexy and that he knew what I was up to by teasing him. I blocked him everywhere, but I always felt like he was watching me all the time. He stopped talking to me, but would always stare at me in class. One day I was on my way home alone after class, and I noticed a car was right next to me, driving slowly. When I looked up, it was him. He talked to me through the window and invited me to get in, said he would give me a ride home. It was a residential street, so there weren't many people around. I said no and continued walking, but he kept insisting and saying he knew where I lived and he could drop me there. I started walking faster and stopped interacting with him at all. I just wanted to get to the main road so there would be more people around. He got angry then and told me to sternly get in a voice I almost didn't recognize. I looked at him then, in shock, and his facial expression had changed completely. He had a dark look in his eyes with no smile at all, and he looked like he wanted to hurt me. I ran and went into the first shop I came across, which was a mini-mart. I waited until his car left and then sped home. After that, I didn't want to go back to class and asked my mum to change it. I never told her why though, as for some reason I felt ashamed, like I'd somehow caused this situation. I finished the semester without incident and thought it was all over. But after 2 years, yes, 2 whole years, he came back. By then I was starting uni, and any thoughts of him were out of my mind, until he created a new account on Facebook and started messaging me like nothing had happened, like no time had gone by. He said he was hurt I'd cut him out of my life, and that he wanted to be my friend. I blocked every account he made without ever answering, but one day, to my surprise, he showed up to my campus. I went to a uni that was close to home, but still, it couldn't have been a coincidence. He was just across the street, watching me, so I hurried and got into a bus before he could talk to me. However, the next week I wasn't so lucky. I was eating a snack at the cafeteria with a group of friends when he suddenly came by and introduced himself to everyone, like we were old friends. I could barely breathe. My friends noticed my reaction, and he seemed to enjoy their confusion and my fear. I pulled him aside and asked him what he was doing, demanding he leave me alone. He said he wouldn't, and again had that dark look he had in the car years before. The creepiest thing, though, was how different it was from the expression he'd had around anyone else. He looked like a different person. I told him I would tell everyone what he'd been doing, and he said he knew I wanted him. He knew I was just a dirty little tease, but that he would get me eventually. My body and mind just shut down when I heard that, and I ran back to my friends and started crying. When I finished telling them everything, he'd gone, and I thankfully never saw him again. I still think about him now. I'm 28 years old, so I don't think he will contact me again. But somehow I still think he could be close by. I don't have Facebook anymore, and never put photos of myself on Instagram, because I'm scared he will see them. At the time I was 26 and shopping at a Target just outside the city I live in. I wasn't there for much, just to kill time and maybe see what deals they had on their clothes. I found some good deals and bought some from clearance, then headed out to my car, just to be stopped by a man and a woman. They handed me a flyer and asked if I was religious. I, being polite, took the bait and said not really, but I was raised Catholic. They asked if I wanted to go to their church, that it was a great community, and talked about God for a bit. They asked some personal questions too, that I kind of danced around, but ultimately said I would think about it. I got a cult creep vibe from them though, and the handout they gave me had the name of their church but nothing else, no address or phone number. I said goodbye and headed quickly to my car. As I was driving home, I noticed a car behind me that had been there since I'd gotten off the highway. I didn't know how long it had been following me, but I wasn't even sure if it was, as the city is dense and it's not uncommon to be heading in the same direction as others. I could see that the person in the driver's seat was an older man. The car is some white SUV, and he had glasses and facial hair. I made a note of this as he continued behind me, and I turned onto a street before my own, without signalling, and he continued by. I then felt a little stupid, and took the next 2 lefts to get to my street, when I saw him slowly driving past me. We made eye contact, and I was a little uncomfortable, but he again just drove by. I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence, when I saw him turn onto the next street. I parked up and rushed into my apartment, a subdivided row house, and I left my target bag in the car, as I was in too much of a rush to grab it. Once upstairs I heard a buzz. Each floor apartment has a buzzer but no intercom, and I was on the 2nd floor. I couldn't see the door from my vantage point, and I debated creeping into the hallway to have a look, as it could have been a package. We have package thieves that follow the trucks and steal package deliveries within minutes, but before I opened the door, I could hear my downstairs neighbour, a guy around my age, talking. Now once the vestibule door had shut, I waited a minute and then knocked on my neighbour's door to ask who it had been. He said it was an older man and was asking for bus fare to the county. I asked him to describe the guy, and it was the same man that had been following me. We realised then that he had buzzed all the apartments to try to get entry into our building. I'm not sure if it was related, but I just had a bad feeling that the couple and their church were related to the man who'd followed me. Like they had scoped me out for something sinister. I googled their church and nothing came up. Well, at least no church of that name. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.